in the past year, we've seen more folks entering and seeking out help and support for emotional wellness than we've seen before. Prior to the pandemic, telemental health was like an option. It was like, you can provide telemental health services if you like.
Right.
But once the pandemic hit, it was like a necessity that we needed to have these options because no one could come out or seek help and it put people that nobody was prepared to be alone. So when you think about some of the things that can trigger your mental health to decline, loneliness, being isolated.
Yeah.
And this pandemic, I think that's one of the top things that the pandemic has done to a lot of people is they've experienced a lot of loss, or they've been isolated from family members, friends. And if they don't have anyone in close proximity who live with them, we've seen like a decline in mental health across the board, from worrying. And one of the big ones is worrying as well, has increased for a lot of people in the past year, and has caused them to seek out support and help with just managing that excessive worry, or trying to figure out how they can deal with the feelings, overwhelming feelings of loneliness and isolation during the past year.
And fear. I mean, there's been an incredible amount of fear because of the pandemic. I have a question for you, Dr. Donita.
Yes.
With all the exposure that we're getting about police violence on the Black community, whether it be occurrences or court cases that are going in or coming out without guilty convictions, what sort of effect might that have on?
And I know we're talking, secondary trauma is a term.
Okay.
That is another factor that could contribute to the decline in mental health. Just the images, the bombardment of, televised, the trial that's happening, all of those things are contributing factors to a decline in mental health.
And we call this secondary trauma.
You said secondary, but one of our listeners, Keith J, he said collective trauma versus individual trauma. I'm not sure of what he meant. He just made the statement. So how do those two traumas play into one's mental health?
So individual trauma would be like direct trauma, somebody who's actually directly impacted by trauma. And collective or secondary trauma is something that, like, collective is what a group experiences, a trauma that's experienced by a particular group, like, people of color or Black people who are experiencing over an exaggerated rate of police brutality. That's collective to a particular group. But it still falls within that secondary or vicarious trauma. It may not directly impact us. We might not be in that car, but we identify with it.
Right.
And so therefore, to experience it or to see it repeatedly happening to your community is a collective trauma.
So that goes back to Vash's statement or question that would be a collective trauma. Am I correct when you asked the question or made the statement, Vash, about seeing the trial and things happen where people are not being convicted? Would that be considered a collective trauma?
According to Dr. Donita, yes. My question was, like, what sort of impact would that have, or should we expect to have? And to find out that it actually has a term, which is secondary trauma, is somewhat, relaxing to a degree, because it's like, all right, it's expected based on all of this.